Greetings. Thank you very much for joining us on this our conversation about how to find and build pathways to caring communities. My name is Hardin Coleman. I'm a professor at Boston University in the Wheelock College of Education Applied Human Development, and I'm working with my co-producer of a podcast, Lizzie Barcay, who can introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Lizzie Barcay. I am a graduate student at BU Wheelock and have been working on this podcast too.
So the goal of our podcast is really to create opportunities for people to meet with leaders and people engaged in youth community work across a variety of different industries to kind of get their sense of how they apply a sense of caring, a focus on character, and thinking about equitable access to education for all kids. And hear their stories. And so what we want to share with you today a little bit is some of the information we found in these episodes.
So in this set of episodes, we were interviewing leaders in organizations focused on advancing equity. And, oh, sorry, I lost that slide. And our primary question was, how do leaders integrate their own sense of character as well as their commitment to creating communities in which all young people can flourish into the work of building organizations that advance equity for culturally and linguistically diverse youth?
And one of the reasons we chose this question is that in the work that we do around people who are talking about caring, people talking about education, people talking about character development, social emotional learning, and equity, we're having a difficult time finding a common shared conversation. And we thought this would be one approach to getting people to think about those as integrated factors and not just different things that different groups of people work with. So we interviewed, as I mentioned before, interviews with leaders of equity advancing organizations, and we asked them what drew them to the work. What does it take to build an effective organization around this type of work of working with equity and caring and character? And then explicitly ask them what roles does caring and character play in the work that they do?
So when we started to ask these questions of these leaders in talking about equity, they all talked a lot about their personal history and their motivation to enter into this work. And when they talked about what motivated them, they all sort of harkened back to experiences early on in their school years, whether they were, children or young adults, when they witnessed and came to understand inequity as it existed within those educational environments. And they became really interested in that after noticing racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic disparities in academic tracking in the schools that they were in, or demographic differences in representation within student organizations and extracurricular activities that they did. All of our leaders took these experiences and had a lot of questions about why that was and wanted to learn more about that.
So one of the first things that our participants came up across is an understanding that there were significant barriers to equity, and they're fairly wide-ranging, and they take on different characteristics. And it's one of the challenges to making changes is the breadth of these barriers. So those included things like accessibility to opportunities. That could be timing of programmings, location of programmings, the dominant language within different programs, and the modality of teaching, all of which for some people may be effective in work, and then there are other people for whom this is the great barriers, and trying to figure out how to integrate that in a way to be provide more transparent and equalize opportunities is one of the challenges that these barriers put up. And the other are cultural divides. So often institutions that are serving youth come from a particular cultural framework, which may be different than those that the children who are seeking the services have. And we found a significant, all the participants identified significant levels of institutional prejudice, that they're built-in values in one institution that are immediately prejudicial against other groups. So in order to break down these variables, it's often necessary to work with constituents who experience them in order to fully understand how they operate. And that's one of the challenges that our leaders came up across. How do I work with people who historically have not been part of either their framework or part of their organization's framework, and being able to move forward with them? The second area that we found that the leaders talk about is this issues of learning how to collaborate, and then how to have real dialogues that lead to really significant engagement.
So related to the barriers that Hardin was just talking about, the leaders talked about how truly understanding those barriers require that they really genuinely invite the participation of their constituents and the people that they aim to serve. So a common theme was that providing educational and extracurricular opportunities to try to advance equity is not sufficient in and of itself, because barriers to access those opportunities are always baked into the systems and not always obvious. And even the ways that those barriers are conceptualized by leaders might not be the same as the way their constituents see them. So they told us that in pursuit of getting accurate data to guide their efforts, leaders really needed to work conscientiously to create conditions that include marginalized constituents and invite their perspectives so that those barriers can be broken down.
And they also talk about those two big challenges is when leaders invite participants, making sure the participants understood that it was a genuine ask. And in that, the leaders had to say they had to be really open to hearing things that they were surprised about or were not part of their expectations. And making that genuine was a tremendous challenge to the work. And the other piece is this issue of accountability and collective responsibility. And it's really, particularly in educational frameworks, this is one of the challenges that we meet across a lot of contexts. So one of the things that the leaders found was very helpful were creating these cultures of collaboration. So it's more than just a single meeting, a single invitation. It's really creating a sense that all people who come into their meetings are really part of the collaboration, and that we have collective responsibility in the organizations and those they seek to serve. So it's not just the school leaders or the youth serving organizations leaders. They want to build the sense of collaboration with their partners, with the people they're serving, so that they felt a part of the organization, not just served by them. In a meeting recently by one of the organizations in the Boston area, they talk about creating this community of belonging that is that is not just within the organization and staff, it's really inclusive of the partners. And so part of what they felt was incredibly important and too often not given the support and the time it needs is collecting the data that needs to be collected and shared in ways that provide accurate and actionable feedback. So how do you collect data, learn more, and put it in a communication style that people can see what your plan of action is, contribute to it, and give you feedback? And that accountability needs to be based on shared values and goals. And so they're building a sense of mutual trust and respect is essential in order to create organizations in which there's really, truly a sense of both caring, community, and equity.
So in this set of episodes, as we interviewed these leaders, implicit and explicit in a lot of what they were saying were caring and character, and particularly an ethic of care that guided these leaders' work with children and with their organizations. So they talked about having a sense of social responsibility and a deep sense that caring for others was their responsibility and something that they believed deeply and learned throughout their childhoods and early adulthoods. That felt like a primary motivator for all of these leaders to engage in this challenging work. And many of them talked explicitly about the fact that caring relationships among students and teachers, among colleagues, among organizations, between organizations and the communities that they serve, that caring relationships between individuals are a primary vehicle for transformative change, both in those individuals and in the organizations that they inhabit. So that ethic of care led them to work really hard on fostering networks of mutual care, making that care, trust, and understanding, putting that at the forefront of their work. And they also discussed mentorship as a bidirectional relationship. So not only setting up caring adults to be mentors to students, but also helping those adults step into those mentorship relationships with open minds, knowing that they stand to learn a lot from the children with who they're working with.
The other related is this the relationship between character and leadership. And our participants really felt that one of the things that was important in their work were building character strengths in the children they were serving. That as much as it was about supporting the adults in the environment, as much as it was part about being open and transparent and equitable, they felt that there needs some explicit work that focus on what can we do to help the children develop their own sense of character and build those strengths. So that included cultivating strengths and mindsets within the institution, that working with their partners, their colleagues, to really start thinking about what are our strengths and what are the mindsets that we bring to this work that represents a strong sense of character in a way that we could be appropriate models for the children in our care. So that really, for many of the leaders, meant putting an ethic of care to the core work of collective efficacy, that the more that we could become engaged in being caring, meeting people where they are, being authentic in our relations with people, the more that they felt that would support the collective efficacy of all the group members in terms of moving forward with whatever services they were providing, whether that was after school programming, educational programming, mental health services. But that ability to build a sense of collective efficacy was central to their success. And part of that was involved cultivating respect, sense of open-mindedness, thoughtful listening. You can see the list, taking responsibility for mistakes, shortcomings, and taking action based on learning. So it's an important combination of being able to try something out, hear how people responded to it, think thoughtfully, react to information that says this is not working for whom, and then learn from those mistakes and shortcomings in the process to really take new actions based on those learnings. And that was experienced by participants as being more caring and authentic, and was fundamental to people's success.
So as our interviewees talk to us about how this operates within systems, a lot of what Hardin was just discussing is about how fostering character strengths within members of organizations that seek to serve youth, how that works and how that operates. There are always multiple levels, and our leaders led us to understand that not only does that need to happen within the organizational level of seeking to serve youth, but also in order to have it sort of authentically braided into the entire process, youth also need the opportunity to have their voices heard, and not only to offer their perspectives in pursuit of having accurate data about, okay, what's helping and how can we further the mission we're trying to accomplish, but also giving those students the opportunity to have authentic experiences of civic engagement within the institutions that they inhabit. So not only inviting in those voices, but really hearing youth out and allowing them to have formative experiences to participate in co-constructing those institutions that are aiming to serve them. So our leaders talked about building a sense of efficacy around change making within youth. So not only inviting their perspectives, but using those perspectives to allow them to make change on a smaller scale, which is important because having those experiences of efficacy within that kind of system can be a self-sustaining process, in which if children are learning this young, that their perspectives matter, their voices matter, and that they can work together to affect change towards equity, that's something that they can carry forward into their adulthood and continue to work towards equity. So this can be a virtuous cycle where cultivating environments in which youth can practice this within their own organizations can lead to more equity down the road.
So From these interviews, we drew a couple conclusions that we want to share with you now. And the first is that creating systems which all children have equal access to opportunity is possible. And I don't mean that as a bromide or throwaway, but I think a lot of times as we work in organizations, a sense of a lack of efficacy about whether our efforts can really pay off often inhibit our ability to take the type of risk and the openness and the caring approach, the willingness to change that our leaders found was necessary. So one of the things we want to remind people that it is possible, and the outcomes are worth the efforts and the fearful attempts of change. And so that requires perseverance, resilience, ability to be able to, when things aren't working well, to kind of overcome the barriers, a willingness to collaborate. These are not the successful leaders that we spoke to were not ones who had a plan that they were going to implement, regardless of how other people experienced it, but these are plans that developed out of a sense of collaboration. But it also demanded a strong sense of self, that the leaders that were successful had a good sense of who they were and what was important for them, and that allowed them to be partners with others. So they were not attempting to recruit people to be like them, but were more willing to be able to be in authentic relations with people as they explored ways of being. And then an openness to be deeply caring of others. And that's anxiety producing. To put yourself out there, to bring your heart into the work is anxiety producing, but they found that over time that it was that very openness to be deeply caring of others that was fundamental to success. And then the other is that leaders must be willing to share strengths and limitations. So both as leaders come in with the skills they have, the experiences they have, the trainings they have, these are strengths they bring to the table they don't ignore, nor do they impose, but they also recognize they come with limitations, that they may not have the same shared experience with the participants. They may not have a perspective about what a particular locality is demanding of people. So willing to bring their strength and the limitations, to own their own mistakes and be open to learning on how to improve was essential to their experience. So we want to thank you for sharing this time with us. And so in a few moments, we want to make sure that we'll be online with you directly to answer your questions. But I want to stop and say that one of the things that we've taken a lot out of this experience is to hear leaders in their struggles and their openness to be struggling and their willingness to reach out for support. So I was wondering, Lizzie, if there anything that you thought that were, as you were able to review these tapes and listen to them deeply, that you think that you would want to think are important as for future leaders to consider?
I thought it was really interesting, you just brought this up in the conclusions, that so often we think about leadership as a sort of taking charge and knowing what to do and leading the way. And I think universally among the leaders who we interviewed, that was not at all how they saw their role. They saw their role as really effective listeners whose job it is to collect real data about what's going on and to find ways to figure out what's really happening and what the barriers really are. And so, in terms of how we think about leadership, and how we teach children about leadership, I think that's a really important point to think about, because I think when we talk about kids who have leadership strengths, we're often thinking about really outgoing people who like to take charge and make decisions, and that's not what we're seeing in these interviews. And I think that would be a really important thing to carry forward in how we talk to children about leadership and how we think about leadership more broadly in institutions of higher education, and what are we teaching people who want to be leaders about what that really means.
Well, we're both very sorry that we can't be with you in Florence. We would love to be, and hopefully this time next year we will be able to. So if you have any questions about direct questions you want to send to us, so here you should have a copy of the PowerPoint, but here are our emails are here, and the podcast that we've talked about, we publish on Substack.com. And so in a few moments when this video ends, we hope to come on live with you in Florence to ask any questions you have now. So once again, thank you very much for your time and look forward to your other questions.
Thank you so much.